Good morning.
Morning. Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom. Let's sing a new song to God.
Okay, but it's an old song.
It's an old song, but
okay.
Yes.
Shabbat Shalom, everyone, and Shabbat Shalom again to Barbara. It is good to be with you here in the Zoom space, and it is good to be with all of you in the internet space. We hope that you will introduce yourself in the chat, either on our Facebook page or our YouTube page or our streaming video page on the website, so that we know who is joining us. It is wonderful to be with you. As always, I want to make a quick reminder that if you are here looking for the B'nai Mitzvah service, you are in the wrong stream, but the right synagogue, and you're going to want to go to the streaming video page of our website and look for the Bearish Sanctuary stream, which is usually right below the Proler Chapel stream. But if you are here for prayer and song and meditation and learning, then you are in the right place. Just if you're looking for a 13-year-old to lead you in those things, you're in the wrong place. We are going to be using Mishkan Tefillah as our prayer book this morning. We will not have slides, so if you are hoping to follow along in a prayer book, either if you have one at home or the ever reliable Jason Plotkin has already put into the Facebook chat the link to the flip book for this service, and we will call out page numbers so that you can follow along on this device or another device, or to use the words that are written on the recesses of your soul. And we will continue this morning with the words of Ma Tovu. These are the words traditionally that one would say as one entered into a sanctuary and remarked on how beautiful the sanctuary is. It's sort of a retelling of that moment in prayer. We are going to use it to marvel at the fact that while we are each in our own tents, what is beautiful is that they together create one prayer community. So Ma Tovu, page 74.
Israel, Adonai ahavti me'on beitecha u'mekom mishkan kevodecha ba'ani eshtachave le'echra'am evrecha lifnei Adonai osim matov. Adonai et ratzon Elohim merov chasecha Aneni be'emet tishecha matov Ohalecha Yaakov Mishkenotecha Yisrael.
A prayer for a reading for Asher Yitzhar on page 77. Don't let me fall as a stone falls upon the hard ground, and don't let my hands become dry as the twigs of a tree when the wind beats down on the last leaves, and when the storm raises dust from the earth with anger and howling. Don't let me fall. I have asked for so much, but as a blade of your grass in a distant wild field, let's drop a seed into the lap of the earth and dies away. Sow in me your living breath as you sow a seed in the earth. Baruch atah Adonai rofecho basar umafli la'asot. What seems like months ago now, because it was months ago, before the High Holy Days, we talked a little bit about Elohai Neshama, and the next prayer that comes, and the rabbis make this connection between between the word neshama, which means soul, and neshima, which means breath, and there is this idea that that our breath is a reminder of our soul. And that also that when we are breathing, our soul is in communication with the universe. We are breathing out and in and filling ourselves with soulfulness and breathing some of ourselves out into the world. And it's a reminder for me that sometimes that the reason that services worship starts with this prayer is that like our breath is we have to root ourselves in our breath, and our that has to be enough to and sometimes that's all we can muster for all of our prayer is just breathing, and that is also a prayer because that is also an expression of our souls. And I think so much in these last months and months and months of quarantining and protecting each other and being very aware of the fact that that dialectic between our breath and the world can also be a great danger in this time has been challenging. And one of the challenges is reminding ourselves that we are enough, and that what we have to offer is enough, and that whatever we have to offer in this service and in this day and in this week and in this year is enough. And trying to use this moment of breath and breathing to remind ourselves that we are enough is, for me at least, a powerful expression. And so I composed this chant to try and remind myself of that. And I taught it before the High Holy Days, and I want to just teach it one more time to you. I'm going to share my screen so that the words, not that they are complicated, are up on the screen. So it goes like this, but first maybe we just breathe for a second. We're doing the best we can with what we've got, which doesn't feel like much, but it is enough. We're doing the best we can with all we are, which is a lot and will be enough. We're doing the best we can with what we've got, which doesn't feel like much, but is enough. We're doing the best we can with all we are, which is a lot and will be enough. And then we can do it with Elohai Neshama. Elohai Neshama, Shena Tatabi, Tehorahi, Tehorahi. Elohai Neshama, Shena Tatabi, Tehorahi, Tehorahi. We're doing the best we can with what we've got, which doesn't feel like much, but is enough. We're doing the best we can with all we are, which is a lot and will be enough. We're doing the best we can with what we've got, which doesn't feel like much, but it is enough. We're doing the best we can with all we are, which is a lot and will be enough. Elohai Neshama Shena Tatabi, Tehorahi, Tehorahi. Elohai Neshama Shena Tatabi, Tehorahi, Tehorahi. What intrigues me about this melody, which came to me, was that you only have time to catch a quick breath in between the little lines. It's actually a melody that makes it a little hard to breathe, and I think that's on purpose. And I think that the purpose is that, like, sometimes we are just catching our breath, and sometimes that's enough too. And if this service this morning can be an opportunity to catch our breath, that will be enough. Elohai Neshama Shena Tatabi, Tehorahi, Tehorahi. Elohai Neshama Shena Tatabi, Tehorahi, Tehorahi. We're doing the best we can with what we've got, which doesn't feel like much, but is enough. We're doing the best we can with all we are, which is a lot and will be enough. We are going to continue with Nisim B'chol Yom, our blessings for daily miracles. Having maybe caught our breath, now we might be able to take stock of the blessings that have led us to this moment. And so as we chant the first couple of sets of these blessings together, which begin on page 80 in your prayer book, we will we'll pause, or I'm going to encourage you to write in the chat on whatever streaming service you are watching a miracle or a blessing for something wonderful that has happened to you today or this week, and we'll pause in the middle to share them. But we continue now with the Nisim B'chol Yom, page 80. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, who has given the mind the ability to distinguish day from night.
Amen.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, who opens the eyes of the blind.
Amen.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, who frees the captive.
Amen.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, who lifts up the fallen.
Amen.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, who stretches the earth over the waters.
Amen.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, who strengthens our steps.
Amen.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, who clothes the naked.
Amen.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, who gives strength to the weary.
Amen.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, who removes sleep from the eyes, slumber from the eyelids.
Amen.
Now we pause for our own blessings. I'll go first. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, for beautiful weather this weekend.
Amen.
A little hot for fall, but we'll take it. Barbara, do you have one?
Yes, but that was it. Actually, I was going to Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, who enables us to feel the changing of the seasons.
Amen. I think there are other places that experience the changing of the seasons even more. People in Colorado keep sending me pictures of the leaves changing, and I'm like, oh, that must be nice. Jamie says, Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, for waking up to great autumn temperatures, ending her first vacation in over 2 years, and best of all, her upcoming conversion this week, to which we say Amen and Mazel Tov. If you have other blessings in the chat, you might be writing them right now, and just bear in mind that you're on a slight delay from us, so I might not see them, and that's okay, but we are really glad for you writing them. We are grateful for all these miracles in our lives, the big miracles and the small miracles, the ones we notice and the ones that sneak past us, for the ones that happen every day and the ones that happen only once in a lifetime, for the miracles that fill our lives and our hearts with joy and love and blessing. For all these things we all say,
Amen.
And we continue on page 84. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, who has made me in the image of God.
Amen.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, who has made me free.
Amen.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, who has made me a Jew.
Amen.
Or will later this week. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, who girds Israel with strength.
Amen.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, who crowns Israel with splendor.
Amen.
One more blessing, all in Hebrew for the study of Torah, page 86. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah.
Amen.
We continue on page 88 with Elu Devarim, a little bit of study since we just said the blessing for the study of Torah. These are the things that are limitless, of which a person enjoys the fruit of the world while the principle remains in the world to come. They are honoring one's father and mother, engaging in deeds of compassion, arriving early for study morning and evening, dealing graciously with guests, visiting the sick, providing for the wedding couple, accompanying the dead for burial, and being devoted in prayer and making peace among people. But the study of Torah encompasses them all. We continue now with Psalm 150 on page 100. As a reminder, as always, this is a joyous song, and we sing joyously together. We continue with Chatzi Kaddish, page 106.
יתגדל ויתקדש שמי רבה ועלמא דברה חירותי וימליך מלכותי בחייכון וביומכון ובחיי כל בית ישראל בגלה ובזמן קריב ואמרו אמן יהי שמי רבה מבורך לעולמי עלמיה יתברך וישתבח ויפאר ויתרומם ויתנשא ויתהדר ויתעלה ויתהלל שמי קודשה לעילם מן כל ברכתה ושירתה תושבחתה ונחמתה גם מאירן בעלמא ואמרו rise for our call to worship. Ya la 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 la. Ya 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 la 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 la. Barechu et Adonai HaMevorach Baruch Adonai HaMevorach HaMevorach Le'olam Va'ed HaMevorach HaMevorach Le'olam Va'ed.
This week in the Torah, we read from the very first chapters of the book of Genesis and Bereshit, and we read about the creation of the universe. And I was thinking about that creation story as I was looking for poetry to add to this morning's service, and it's not hard to find poetry that celebrates the beauty of creation. As our Yotzer or this morning, I wanted to share with you this poem called This World by Mary Oliver. It goes like this. I would like to write a poem about the world that has in it nothing fancy, but it seems impossible. Whatever the subject, the morning sun glimmers it. The tulip feels the heat and flaps its petals open and becomes a star. The ants bore into the peony bud, and there is a dark pinprick well of sweetness. As for the stones on the beach, forget it. Each one could be set in gold. So I tried with my eyes shut, but of course the birds were singing, and the aspen trees were shaking the sweetest music out of their leaves. And that was followed by, guess what? A momentous and beautiful silence, as comes to all of us in little earfuls if we're not too hurried to hear it. As for spiders, how the dew hangs in their webs, even if they say nothing or seem to say nothing. So fancy is the world, who knows, maybe they sing. So fancy is the world, who knows, maybe the stars sing too, and the ants and the peonies and the warm stones so happy to be where they are on the beach instead of being locked up in gold. Baruch atah Adonai, Yotzer HaMeorot. Page 113. Love your neighbor as yourself, you said. And like blinded, we saw that inner and outer worlds are one as you are one. You spoke and we wrote, we reached for you down the centuries, your light moving before us as we climbed fell back and climbed again your Sinai of life. Baruch atah Adonai habocher be'amo Yisrael be'ahava.
Again. Shema Yisrael Adonai Eloheinu Adonai Echad Baruch Shem Kevod Malchuto Leolam
You may be seated as we continue with Ve'ahavta, page 116.
Ve'ahavta et Adonai Elohecha b'chol levavcha u'b'chol nafshecha u'b'chol meodecha ve'hayu hadvarim ha'eleh asher anochi mitzavecha hayom al levavecha ושיננתם לבניך ודיברת בם בשבתך בביתך ובלכתך בדרך ובשוכבך ובקומך וקשרתם לאות על ידיך והיו לטוטפות בין עיניך וכתבתם על מזוזות ביתך ובשעריך למען תזכרו ועשיתם את כל מצוותיי והייתם קדושים לאלוהיכם אני אדוני אלוהיכם אשר הוצאתי אתכם מארץ מצרים להיות לכם לאלוהים אני אדוני אלוהיכם.
Page 119 in the middle of the page. We pray together. Life without integrity is like loosely hanging threads, easily fraying from the main cloth. While in acts of piety, we learn to understand that every instant is like a thread raveling out of eternity to form a delicate tassel. We must not cast off the threads, but weave them into a design of eternal fabric. Each day points to eternity. The fate of all time depends on a single moment. We continue with Mi Chamocha, page 122.
Mi chamocha ba'im Adonai, mi kamocha nedar b'chodesh, nora tehilo lo sepele, nora tehilo o sepele. Who is like you, Adonai? Who is like you, Adonai? Ya la la la, ya la 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 la, ya la 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 la, ya la 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 la. Ya la la la, ya la 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 la, ya la 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 la, ya la 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 la.
We continue with the Amidah, which begins on page 124, and invite you please to rise in body or in spirit.
Adonai sefatai tiftach ufi yagi tehilatecha. Adonai open mouth may declare your praise. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu v'Elohei Avotenu v'Imotenu, Elohei Abraham, Elohei Yitzchak, Elohei Yaakov, Elohei Sarah, Elohei Rivka, Elohei Rachel, Elohei Leah, Ha'el Hagadol, Hagibor v'Hanora, El Elyon, Gomel Chasadim Tovim, V'Konei Hakol, V'Zocher Chastei Avot v'Imahot, U'Mevi Geula Lifnei V'neihem, Lema'an Shemo B'Yahava, Melech Ozer Moshiach U'Magen, Baruch atah Adonai, Magen Avraham Bezrat Sarah. Atah Gibor Leolam Adonai, Mechayeh HaKol atah Rav Lehoshia, Mashiv HaRuach U'Morid HaGashem, Mechakel Chayim Bechesed, Mechayeh HaKol Berachamim Rabim, Somech Noflim Verofei Cholim, Umatir Asurim, Umekayem Emunato Lishenei Afar, Michamocha Ba'al Givurot, Umito Melach, Melech Meimit Umechayeh, Umatzmiach Yeshua, V'ne'eman atah lehachayot hakol, Baruch atah Adonai, Mechayeh hakol. Nikadesh et shimcha ba'olam, Kishem shemakdishim oto b'shmei marom, Kakatuv ayad nevi'echa, V'kara ze el ze ve'amar, Kadosh, 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 Adonai Tzevaot, Meloch ha'aretz, Kevodo, Adir, Adirenu, Adonai, Adonenu ma'adir, Shimcha bechol haaretz, Baruch Kevod Adonai Bimkomo. Echad hu Eloheinu, Hu Avinu Malkeinu, Hu Moshienu Behu Yashmienu, Berachamav le'inei kol chai. Ani Adonai Elohechem, Yimloch Adonai le'olam, Elohayich Tzion, Ledor vador. Hallelujah. Ledor vador nagid god lecha, U'netzach netzachim kedushacha nakdish, V'shivchacha Eloheinu mipinu lo yamush le'olam va'ed. Baruch atah Adonai ha'el hakadosh.
Shall we continue with a little Yismichu?
Absolutely.
I know you're shocked.
Let's do. ישמחו במלכותך, שומרי 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 שבת גיבורי עונג שבת. ישמחו במלכותך, שומרי 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 שבת גיבורי עונג שבת. מקדשי שלי שבת, כולם ישמעו ויתענגו מטובך שבת. ישמחו במלכותך, שומרי 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 שבת וקוראי עונג שבת. ישמחו במלכותך, שומרי 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 שבת וקוראי עונג שבת. והשביעי רצית בו וקידשת שבת. חמדת ימים אותו קראת שבת. ישמחו במלכותך, שומרי 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 שבת וקוראי עונג שבת. ישמחו במלכותך, שומרי 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 שבת וקוראי עונג שבת. זכר למעשה בראשית שבת. זכר למעשה בראשית שבת. ישמחו מלכותך, שומרי 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 שבת וקוראי עונג שבת. ישמחו במלכותך, שומרי 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 שבת וקוראי עונג שבת.
Thank you for that. Like I said, I was thinking about creation and the beauty and wonder of creation as I was thinking about poems for this week, and I wanted to share with you. I think I've shared it in this group in this service before, but one of my favorite poems on the topic is this poem by a poet named Connie Winnick called Mrs. God Poems, and it's a series of little vignettes that imagine God's wife, Mrs. God's reaction to creation. I recognize the gendered nature of God in that poem does not reflect how I understand God, but her exasperation with her husband does reflect how I sometimes understand God. And so I wanted to share with you just 3 of the little vignettes because I love this poem as our prayer, our Kedushat Hayom, our prayer for Shabbat today. So it goes like this. Someone had to do the dirty work, spading the garden, moving mountains, keeping the darkness out of light, and she took every imperfection personally. Mr. Big Ideas, sure, but someone had to run the numbers. Then talk about babies. He never imagined so many. That was part of his charm, of course, his frank amazement at consequences. The pretty songs he gave to the finches, those spoke of his innocence, his ability to regard every moment as fresh. Let's give them free will and see what happens. Ever the optimist. Other days God seemed severe, but he was always hardest on himself. Curious, he watched Mrs. God, the way she distanced herself from disasters, especially the ones he himself unintentionally set in motion. All God asked for was eternal work. Luckily, Something was always broken. A virus began to kill its hosts, or claws needed sharpening, and afterwards he had to make them retractable. Weather was a challenge, finicky like those old carburetors. But gravity turned out perfectly. Hummingbirds could fly, but people didn't float around, and two legs worked fine. Mrs. God's radiant smile, yes, he gave that to the sun and all the stars, and then to Eve. This other vignette is called Day of Rest. The good Lord had primer on his hands, but paint could wait till Monday. Mrs. God assured him, seeing how tired he was. He said, "You should talk, you're still working." It's true. She was wearing her garden gloves and her pants with muddy knees. Well, Eden's almost done for the season. Bare, ruined choirs in the arbor where late we walked. Choirs, he mused. Is that a new word? She smiled. How do you think we should spell it? From a distance, earth was turning into a masterpiece. God pondered a second sun so that there'd never be a dark side. No, she reflected, one noon is plenty, and see how rich the blues as light fades. Perhaps a moon then, just a little one. And that bit of tinkering was all they did for the rest of the day. Baruch atah Adonai Mekadesh HaShabbat. We take a few moments now to pray to Mr. or Mrs. or however we understand God with our own words and our own hearts.
Oh, say shalom b'roma, Uriah ase shalom aleinu, ve'al kol Yisrael, ve'al kol yoshvei tevel, ve'imru.
We continue now as we transition to our brief Torah service with a little Romamu.
Romemu Adonai Eloheinu ve'ishtachavu behar kodsho. Romemu Adonai Eloheinu ve'ishtachavu behar kodsho. Ki kadosh Adonai Eloheinu Romemu. Ki kadosh Adonai Eloheinu Romemu.
So a few thoughts on this week's Torah portion. As I said, this week's portion is Bereshit, at the very beginning of the book of Genesis, and I want to focus this morning on a passage that may be less familiar to you. This is one of those Torah portions that's chock full of things you probably did learn in religious school, even if you only went one day, right? You get creation, you get Adam and Eve, you get Garden of Eden, you get Cain and Abel, right? We really play the hits in this portion. There's a lot crammed into these 5 chapters. The part I want to talk about maybe didn't come up as much, which is what happens to Cain's children. I've been thinking a lot about human progress lately as I was preparing to write my Rosh Hashanah sermon on race and racism, as we are preparing to engage ever more deeply in anti-racism work and in racial awareness and racial justice at the congregation, including a program this week that I'll talk about during announcements. Been thinking about human progress because we have a tendency to understand progress as linear and always moving in one direction. There are a lot of people who think of the progress that we have made around issues of race, and in particular, the progress that America made in the 1960s with the Civil Rights Acts and civil rights legislation and the civil rights movement as a sign that we are always headed in one direction. And so sometimes people say to me when they hear that we're doing this work, but Rabbi, aren't these issues that have already been addressed? And I think that that is a problematic way to understand human progress, which does not move in a straight line and has a lot of backsliding. And we see that in this week's Torah portion. One of the things that makes the Torah unique of all the other ancient sort of sacred literatures and sacred mythologies is their understanding, the Torah's understanding of where human progress comes from. Tikva Framer-Kensky points out that most religions in the ancient Near East understood human innovation as gifts from God. So gods would teach people how to build or how to plant, right? You know, we know like in Greek mythology, human beings steal, the gods steal fire for human beings, right? Because human beings don't discover fire on their own. It's something that has to be given to them by the gods or sometimes stolen from the gods. So all the progress that humanity makes are things bestowed by God on human beings. But the Torah understands human progress very differently. It understands human innovation as something that comes from humanity, not from God. So Cain, we're taught, was the very first person to establish a city. And the idea of cities comes not from God, but from Cain. And in the passage that I want to look at from this week's story portion, which I will share with you now, first we just a little bit of context. So Cain has just killed his brother. He's been given this curse that he is to walk the earth. And Cain says to the Eternal, "My punishment's too great to bear, too heavy for me. Since you have banished me this day from the soil, I must avoid your presence and become a restless wanderer on the earth. Anyone who meets me may kill me." And the Eternal said to him, "I promise, if anyone kills Cain, sevenfold vengeance shall be taken on him." And the Eternal put a mark on Cain, lest anyone who met him should kill him. Hold that as context for a minute, but here's what I want to focus on. So Cain left the presence of the Eternal and settled in the land of Nod, east of Eden. Cain knew his wife, and they bore a son named Enoch. And then he founded a city, my point exactly, named that city after his son Enoch. To Enoch was born Irad. Irad begot Mehujael, and Mehujael begot Methuselah, and Methuselah begot Lamech. And here we're in the line of Lamech now. So a couple of generations removed from Adam and Eve and Cain and Abel. Lamech took for himself two wives, and the name of one was Ada, and the name of the other was Zillah. Ada bore Yabal, who was the ancestor of those who dwell in tents and amidst herds. So he invents herding and keeping of livestock. And the name of his brother, Yubal, was the ancestor of all who played the lyre and the pipe, musicians. And for Zillah, she bore Tubal-Cain, who forged all implements of copper and iron. Everyone who was into smelting can trace their lineage to Tubal-Cain. And he had a sister named Nama who isn't given any inventions. And so this passage says that all of these descendants of Cain invent these things. They invent herding, they invent cities, they invent musical instruments and implements of copper and iron. And again, what Bible scholars and scholars of the ancient Near East point out is that this is a departure from other mythologies, because it doesn't say, and God gave to Yuval the lyre and then he knew how to play it. It just says he came up with it somehow. And we're not even told where that idea comes from. So on the one hand, we have this idea in the Torah of a progress that is inherent in the human experience. Already, after only a couple of generations, human beings are creating all these things they need for a civilization. They're creating ways to get food. They're creating communities like cities. They're creating all these things. And at the same time, all of the people we're being told about here in this passage, who are the inventors of this human innovation, are all descendants of Cain, descendants of the very first murderer. And I don't think we're supposed to, I think we're supposed to notice that. I think we're supposed to be aware of the fact that we are, that while this progress may be valuable, it is also complex, right? And I think it's emphasized by the fact that all of these great grandchildren of Cain have names or some of them have names like Tubal Cain that relate to him. Like, we're supposed to not forget him, that he's a part of this story. And so there is a certain amount, according to Rabbi Shai Held, of violence and danger and problem in these innovations. They are not inherently good. They are just a part of the human story. And we see this most significantly in this very strange passage that comes next, where it says, and Lamech said to his wives, Ada and Zillah, hear my voice, O wives of Lamech, give ear to my speech. I have slain a man for wounding me, and a lad for bruising me. If Cain is avenged sevenfold, then Lamech 77-fold. This is a very strange passage. It's not really remarked upon in the text. They just move on. But I think that essentially what Rabbi Shai Held says we should read from this text is this is what society has come to by the seventh generation since Cain. The society has come to a certain love of violence, a certain reveling in violence, where for Cain, there was an understanding of the consequences of his violence, an understanding of the consequences of his actions, and a desire to be close to God and have the consequence mitigated in some way. By the time we get to Lamech, he just loves hurting people, so that someone bruised him and he killed him in response. A young boy, a Yeled, bruised him and he murdered him. And so built into this human progress is this violence, and it's not all good, and it's supposed to be complex. And Shai Held gives this quote from scholar Richard Middleton, who says, what becomes clear from primeval history is that cultural achievements of the human race testify not only to a God-given human power and agency, but also to the possibility of using that power and agency to accomplish evil. Specifically, the culture that humans develop is profoundly intertwined with violence. And Shai Held goes on to point out an interesting relationship between this passage and the passage from Exodus that we know as Lex Talionis, an eye for an eye. Right? It says if one human damages, if someone is injured, the punishment shall be a life for a life, an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth, a hand for a hand, foot for a foot, burn for burn, wound for wound, bruise for bruise, etc. And we tend to think of that as very violent. We tend to think of that as a really challenging text because, and the rabbis are so bothered by it that they quickly sort of replace that system with monetary fines. You should pay the value equal to an eye or a tooth or whatever, because as the saying goes, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth will leave the whole world blind and toothless. But actually, we might, from this Lamech passage, understand something different. We might understand that this is actually meant to be a limit on vengeance. Only an eye for an eye. Only a tooth for a tooth. Whereas Lamech was willing to kill someone for even the smallest bruise. What the Torah is doing is defining a system of justice where there is no, where vengeance has to be equal, where response has to be proportional, because there is an instinct in humanity to want to take a vengeance greater than the harm that was done to you. And so even to us, this idea of an eye for an eye feels very sort of violent and problematic. To the people of the time, it was actually a great limitation on their power. And Shai Held points out a really interesting lexical relationship that in that passage, the last two things, a wound for a wound, a bruise for a bruise, actually use the exact same words as what Lamech is saying. He murdered someone for a wound and a bruise. And so we're meant to hear a sort of call back to this. What is all of this to say? All of this to say, and it's not the most uplifting message for Shabbat, but I think it's an important message. We like in America to think of human progress as inherently good, that the more we do, the better things get. And in some way that is often true, but it is not always true. It is certainly true that there are fewer starving people or sick people by proportion now than there have ever been in human history. There are more people with wealth and homes than there have ever been in human history. People are living longer than they ever have in human history. We can point to examples of the success of human progress. And we know from the 20th century of amazing examples in vaccines, in technologies that allow people to live, that are huge and wonderful things, that are examples of that God-given ability to learn and grow and make society better. And we know from the 20th century that there are that technology can be used not only for good but to harm people. And the great systemization of murder that was the Holocaust is only the most poignant example of technological progress not leading to good but to evil. And I think, and this is what Rabbi Shai Held says, that this text is not meant to give us an answer one way or the other. It's not meant to say that progress is only divine, or progress is only good, or progress is only bad. But progress is made by human beings, and human beings are complex, and human beings contain within us the ability to do good and the ability to do bad. And we have to force the progress to be good. And we have to ensure that the progress does good in this world. And so as we think about the human progress that we have made around issues like race since the 1960s and the civil rights movement, we have to be able to acknowledge that it is not only forward motion. That, for instance, in the 1960s, as we are passing the civil rights acts that are making such a huge difference, there's also a huge boom for the Confederate statue industry. And not all Confederate statues are from that period, but a great many are from that period, because there was progress and there was backsliding. I think we can also point to the election of Barack Obama as a step forward for our country, our nation's first Black president, but also something that brought out and made thrive new kinds and expressions of racism that we are still wrestling with today. And so part of how we ensure that we work towards, sort of that quote from Martin Luther King about the arc bends towards justice, how we work on bending that arc is acknowledging the places where we are bending towards justice and the places where we are not yet bending towards justice. And we are limited by the fallacy that progress is only positive, that technological improvement, that innovation, it can only help humanity. Technological innovation, improvement, new laws, new civil rights for new groups, all of those things will help humanity only if we insist upon it, only if we work to make that true, only if we constantly are refreshing that process and constantly in conversation with our values. And there is a violence that is sort of I think the Torah is saying that it's not innate in human nature, but is innate in sort of the machinations of society and the systems of society. And unless we are willing to acknowledge that violence, unless we are willing to create ways to mitigate that violence in ourselves and in the society in which we live, we will succumb to it. The goal is not to be like Cain. The goal is certainly not to be like Lamech, but the goal is to acknowledge that those desires exist in us, and to ensure that we build a society of progress that does not celebrate violence, that does not celebrate hurting other people, that does not celebrate disproportionality, but rather one that celebrates justice and equality and proportionality. And so I think that part of what this story, where, what we usually focus on in this text is all people are created equal, all of us are created in the image of God, and that's true. But also contained within us is challenge, and until we acknowledge that challenge, we risk ignoring it, and when we ignore it, it festers. So my prayer, my hope, my desire for us as we are thinking about the kind of world we want to live in, the kind of society we want to live in, as we are thinking about voting in this election, that we are aware that progress is only progress when we make it so, that we are aware that we have a hand to play, that God empowers us, that God gives us the creative tools to make this world better, but that God is counting on us to use them. So with that as a Shabbat message, I am going to read for you a little bit from this passage. I'm going to read verses 19 to 24. I will pull it back up on the screen. Let's see if I can get it all in. There we go. Okay. Hopefully, maybe a part of this Torah portion that you've not heard chanted before. Where are we? 19. Okay. ויקח לו למך שתי נשים, שם האחת עדה, ושם השני צילה, ותלד עדה את יבל, הוא היה אבי, יושב אוהל ומקנה, ושם אחיו יובל, הוא היה אבי, כל תופס כנעור ועוגה, וצילה גם היא, ילדה את תובל קין, לא תש כל חורש נחושת וברזל, ואחות תובל קין נמה, ויאמר למך לנשיו, עדה וצלעה שמען קולי, נשי למך הזנה אמרתי, כי איש הרגתי לפצעי, וילד לחבורתי, כי שבעתיים יוקם קין, ולמך 77. With thoughts of Torah on our lips and thoughts of and with words of Torah on our lips and thoughts of human progress, but also our power to be sources of progress, we think now of people in our lives and in our world who are in need of healing, who are in need of hope and strength, who are struggling on a path towards wholeness, shlemut, who are struggling with addiction, who are in recovery, who struggle with chronic pain and chronic illness. We are thinking of all those in our lives and in our community who are ill with COVID and who are caring for those who are ill. And we offer words of Mishaberach, words of healing and hope.
May the source of strength who bless the ones before us help us find the courage to make our lives a blessing, and let us say Amen. Mekor Avraham Lavotenu. Bless those in need of healing with refuah shlema, the renewal of body, the renewal of spirit, and let us say Amen.
A few announcements for this Shabbat. Emmanuel Votes is our nonpartisan campaign to achieve 100% voter turnout amongst our congregants in this year's election. The EE Votes team would like to remind you that early voting is underway in Harris County. The last day to apply for a ballot by mail is approaching. Your request must be received in the clerk's office, not merely postmarked, but received by Friday, October 23rd. For all the details, please visit our website, emmanuelhouston.org/EEvotes, which I'm going to put in the Facebook chat. And the other thing I'm going to put in the Facebook chat is we've been hearing from folks that it is very confusing how to safely and correctly submit your mail ballot if you are a person over 65 or with a disability or out of the state for the entire early voting, or out of the county for the entire early voting and election day period. You can apply for a mail ballot, and it is a little bit confusing how you fill it out, how you mail it back in, how you get it in safely and securely. So the EE Votes team asked me to record a video this week, which I joyfully did, which is on our YouTube page, and I just put the link in the Facebook chat for sort of step-by-step instructions of how to vote by mail. If you've got your mail ballot, it's worth watching as a way to make sure you're doing that correctly. If you have questions, please email us. The EE Votes email address is on the EE Votes webpage. We would love to be able to try and help you answer your question. Thank you to the almost 300 people who have filled out our voter commitment form. If you haven't taken the pledge, please do so also at the EE Votes webpage. Please make plans to join us for an exciting game of online trivia tomorrow, Sunday, October 18th, 7 p.m. Pre-registration is required. We hope you'll join us. Lastly, as I mentioned a little bit in my Devar Torah, our Racial Justice Book Club will begin on Thursday, October 22nd at 7:30 p.m. We'll be reading the book by Ibram Kendi, How to Be an Anti-Racist. We're reading it in 2 sessions. The first session will cover sort of the first half of the book up through chapter 10. The second session in November will cover the second half of the book. We're asking people, really, really encouraging people both to have read the book up through chapter 10 to participate, and also to make a commitment to be at both sessions. More information is available on our website. We are asking you to register in advance. I hope it'll be a really meaningful conversation and a way to dig deeply into a book that is challenging, that pushes a lot of buttons, but that also has some really interesting and important things to say that build on this message of how do we actually make progress. With all those thoughts, we are now going to turn to a moment of memory beginning on page 293. Our thoughts turn to those who have departed this earth, our own loved ones, those whom our friends and neighbors have lost, the martyrs of our people whose graves are unmarked, and those of every race and nation whose lives have been a blessing to humanity. As we remember them, we meditate on the meaning of love and loss, life and death. We take a few moments for silent memory. We think of our loved ones whom death has recently taken from us, those who've died in this season in years past, and those whom we have drawn into our hearts with our own. Our heart goes out in sympathy to the family of Alan Lewis Leon, who was an important part of this Saturday morning chapel prayer community, in addition to being an important part of our congregational community, and who was laid to rest this week. We send love and tenderness to his family as we think of all those in our lives who are remembering this week, and rise together for the words of Mourner's Kaddish on page 294. Yitkadal v'yitkadash shmei Rabbah, ve'alma divrach yerutei ve'almich malchutei, v'chayachon v'yomechon u'chayei dechol beit Yisrael, ba'agala u'vizman kariv imru amen. Yehei shmei Rabbah mivorach le'olam omei amaya, v'yitbarach v'yishtabach v'yitpa'ar v'yitchomam v'yitnasei, v'yitadar v'yitaleh v'yitalal shmei dekudsha brichu, le'ela min kol birchata v'shirata, tushbechata v'ne'emata, Ta'amiram be'ama ve'imru amen. Yehei shlama rabba min shemaya, v'chaim aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael ve'imru amen. Osei shalom b'mramav, hu ya'aseh shalom, aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael ve'imru amen.
Osei shalom b'mramav, hu ya'aseh shalom aleinu, ve'al kol Yisrael ve'imru amen. We are going to end with Hine Matov. How nice it is that we are all here together. Hine Matov manayim shevet achim gam yachad. Hine Matov manayim shevet achim gam yachad. Hine Matov shevet achim gam yachad. Hine Matov shevet achim gam yachad. Hine tov manayim shevet achim gam yachad. Hine matov manayim shevet achim gam yachad.
Shall we continue with a little Kiddush?
We shall. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, borei peri hagafen.
L'chaim. And a little motzi.
Little Motzi.
My only challah was also last night's challah, so it's missing it here. If I hold it right below at the bottom of the screen, you can't tell. There you go. Okay, now it's a secret no one knows. Great, go.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, hamotzi lechem min haaretz. Amen. B'te'avon and Shabbat Shalom.
B'te'avon Shabbat Shalom. A little benediction as we end this morning. Eloheinu v'Elohei Avotenu v'Imotenu, our God and God of our ancestors, who endowed in our ancestors and in us amazing potential for progress, amazing potential to be partners with God in the creation of the world. This week, as we read about that creation, we remember that we have the power within us to finish that work of creation, to make this world more perfect, to make this world more whole, to bring about an age that could only be described as messianic. And we are aware that we have within us the power to do good and the power to make this world worse, to make this world more violent, to make this world more broken. We are grateful to you for the reminders daily that we have a choice, that we can choose, that we can use the power you have placed within us for good. Help us to know that. Help us to use our strength and our power to do good and bring light to this world. We thank you for the many blessings in our lives, and we say together, Amen.
Amen.
Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom.
A tiny bit more Hine Matov to send us out.
Hine ma tov u'manayim, shevet achim gam yachad. Hine ma tov u'manayim, shevet achim gam yachad.
Shabbat Shalom, everyone.
Shabbat Shalom.